The January blizzard shrieked across Dakota territory, like the wail of vengeful spirits hurling ice crystals sharp enough to blind a man at 50 paces. Celia Bergstrom stumbled through drifts that reached her waist, each step a conscious victory against the storm's determination to claim her life. 28 years old, Swedish-born and widowed for exactly 23 days, she pressed Johann's leather satchel against her chest as if it contained fragments of his departing soul. Celia min Kärlek, if something happens to me. Johann's voice seemed to whisper through the howling wind, their final conversation echoing with prophetic weight. The rifle components hidden in my workshop, they're worth more than our farm, more than everything we've built together. But they'll murder you without hesitation if you're discovered with them. Hurjar, her husband's last gift, had been knowledge wrapped in warning, delivered mere hours before Sergeant Pike's collectors had arranged the accidental axle brake that sent Johann tumbling beneath 2 tons of military freight. The so-called mishap had been precisely calculated, brutally executed, and devastatingly effective at silencing a clockmaker who had grown uncomfortable with the illegal modifications he'd been compelled to perform. Through the swirling white veil that obscured everything beyond arm's reach, a weathered line shack materialized like salvation carved from desperation itself. Smoke curled defiantly from its stone chimney, and behind rough-hewn fence rails, a bay horse lifted its head, with the casual alertness of an animal long accustomed to sensing danger before it struck. The cabin door opened before Celia could collapse against its frame. A man emerged, tall as the lodgepole pines that dotted the river breaks, moving with fluid economy that spoke to survival skills earned through brutal experience. His obsidian hair hung in traditional braids adorned with blue trade beads that caught what little light penetrated the storm's fury. But it was his face that made her breath catch the left side, marked by a spider web of white scars, radiating outward from an eye-clouded milk pail with old injury. Yet that damaged eye didn't diminish his presence. Instead, he carried himself with a heightened awareness of someone who had learned to read the world through enhanced senses, compensating for visual limitation with tactical intelligence that missed nothing of importance. He held a magnificent war bonnet in his gloved hands, its eagle feathers pristine despite the savage wind. Not wearing it in ceremony, but gripping it like a sacred shield against gusts that could tear holy things from a man's grasp and scatter them across the frozen wasteland where they would never be recovered. "Stay where you are," he commanded in English, touched with the musical cadences of Lakota. His voice carried absolute authority, the kind that could make wolves pause mid-hunt and reconsider their intentions. Celia's lips had turned blue-black with cold, and her words emerged as barely more than frost-crystallized whispers. "Please, I can offer payment." She raised the satchel with hands that trembled from far more than winter's bite. Inside lay the dismantled components of her husband's final project, Springfield rifle parts, modified with the precision that had made Johann's name whispered with respect among the shadow networks thriving in spaces between law and necessity. The man studied her with calculating assessment, weighing compassion against consequence, with the practiced judgment of someone who understood that survival meant making difficult choices without the luxury of extended deliberation. His scarred features revealed nothing but. She caught the subtle way he tilted his head to bring her fully into his functional eye's range, a movement so practiced it appeared natural. "What manner of payment?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the limited options available to a woman alone in such circumstances. "Whatever you require." The admission carried implications that made both of them pause, understanding the harsh arithmetic that often governed frontier exchanges between desperate people. The man Nayati, though she didn't yet know his name, meant "he who wrestles," stepped closer with movements that demonstrated complete adaptation to partial blindness. When he took the satchel, his fingers assessed its contents through the leather, with delicate precision that rivaled a safecracker's touch. These weren't ordinary stolen supplies. They constituted evidence of a shadow network reaching into territorial authorities' highest levels, the kind of evidence that could hang everyone who possessed it or make them wealthy beyond imagination if they located appropriate buyers willing to pay premium prices for superior weapons. Every instinct screamed that he should push her back into the white death waiting beyond his threshold. Instead, something in her eyes' determination forged in grief's crucible strength that loss had revealed rather than destroyed made him choose mercy over prudence. Without another word, he shouldered the door wide and pulled her inside. The cabin's warmth struck her like a physical blow, carrying scents of wood smoke leather and rabbit stew bubbling over glowing coals. Nayati draped his own buffalo robe over her shoulders, winter thick and lined with red trade wool. The gesture was practical rather than tender, but its weight felt like the first genuine kindness she had experienced since Johan's funeral. "You carry death with you," he observed matter-of-factly. Celia nodded, melted snow dripping from her hair. "I understand that. Army death. Pike's death." The name emerged like poison. "He murdered my husband for debt and claimed everything we owned. Everything except what's hidden in that satchel." Nayati's scarred features showed no reaction, but she caught the subtle tightening around his good eye. Pike's name carried significant weight throughout the territory, the kind that crushed anyone foolish enough to position themselves in its path. He ladled stew into a tin bowl. "Eat first. Dead women make poor partners." Partners. The word hung between them like smoke from a signal fire. As Celia lifted the spoon with fingers that barely functioned, she understood that something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer merely a victim fleeing disaster. She had become a player in a deadly game whose stakes were measured in survival itself. Dawn broke gray and bitter over endless grassland, the blizzard having exhausted itself sometime before sunrise. Celia woke to the sound of Nayati moving through morning routines, with practiced quiet banking calls, checking windows, preparing coffee from chicory root and ancient grounds. In full daylight, she could observe him more clearly. Perhaps 32 years old, with the lean strength of someone who lived by skill rather than brute force. The scarring extended from temple to cheekbone, old burns that had healed white and tight, leaving the eye beneath permanently clouded. But watching him adapt to partial blindness revealed remarkable precision. He never relied on peripheral vision from his damaged side, instead turning his entire head in smooth movements that kept important details within his functional range. His hands moved with enhanced sensitivity, reading surfaces and textures that sight alone might miss. "Coffee?" he asked without looking directly at her. "Please." Nayati handed her a steaming cup, then settled across the small table. Morning light revealed the careful organization of his tools, the quality of his Winchester where it rested in wooden brackets, subtle signs of prosperity that spoke to successful survival. "We need to establish clear terms," he said without preamble. "What sort of terms?" "Your husband taught you his trade. I can see it in how you examine metal objects, how your hands move around mechanical components." His good eye fixed on her with unsettling directness. "I need weapons modified and repaired. There are people along the river breaks who pay exceptionally well for quality work." "What people?" "Lakota who refuse reservation life. Miners who've learned not to trust army protection. Settlers who understand that written law has distinct boundaries." He paused, selecting words with diplomatic care. "People like yourself who find themselves caught between official authority and personal survival." Celia grasped the implications immediately. This wasn't about serving abstract righteousness, but about serving those abandoned by righteous institutions. In exchange, food, shelter, protection from men who might misunderstand your circumstances. His expression remained carefully neutral, And to anyone who asks questions, you're my wife. Makes your presence here explainable. The proposal settled between them like a contract written in smoke and necessity. Marriage as camouflage partnership, as survival strategy. In the brutal mathematics of frontier life, where unprotected women were inevitably classified as either prey or property, it made ruthless sense. What rules would govern such an arrangement? You don't travel to town alone under any circumstances. I don't ask about what you're running from beyond what you've told me. You don't ask about the specific business I conduct along the river. Sleeping arrangements. Separate quarters. No expectations beyond the work itself and mutual protection. Celia studied his scarred features, searching for deception. She found only pragmatic calculation recognition that survival sometimes required alliances transcending conventional morality. Very well, but I need to examine those rifle parts first. Nayati nodded and retrieved the satchel. As Celia spread the components across the table, her hands moved with unconscious confidence. The parts were exceptional quality Springfield Model 1873 components, some showing expert modification, others appearing to be custom manufactured replacements. These aren't simply stolen military supplies. She observed, examining a trigger mechanism reworked with remarkable precision. Someone's been systematically improving them, creating weapons that significantly surpass standard Army specifications. Johan's work, some of it. She held up a firing pin bearing her husband's distinctive file marks. But there's other craftsmanship here. At least 2 different gunsmiths, possibly 3. This represents part of something much larger. Interest flickered in Nayati's good eye. Can you complete what they started? Celia examined a partially rebored barrel. Given proper tools and sufficient time, I can produce 6 complete rifles ready for market. Perhaps more if I can match trigger groups to appropriate frames. Tools I can provide. Ephraim Cutter's ranch maintains a workshop he rents to skilled craftsmen. As they discussed technical details, Celia became aware of how Nayati compensated for his visual limitations. He positioned himself so she remained within his good eye's range, used his hands to verify measurements, relied on enhanced hearing and touch to supplement sight. How long have you adapted to the limitation? 15 years come spring. His fingers unconsciously traced scarred tissue. Lodge fire when I was barely 17. Thought I could fight flames with determination and bare hands. What started the fire? The silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his voice carried old anger, carefully controlled but never extinguished. Sergeant Amos Pike. Called it a training exercise gone wrong, but torches don't throw themselves at midnight while families sleep. The name struck her like icy water. The same Pike whose signet ring had stamped Johan's debt papers, whose greed had orchestrated her husband's death. The enemy she was fleeing had been Nayati's nemesis for 15 years, a connection too significant for coincidence. He burned your family's camp, my mother's lodge. Killed her 3 aunts, 2 small cousins. Nayati's voice remained level, but she could hear controlled fury beneath the words. Official report claimed accident during night maneuvers. Truth is, Pike was experimenting with terror tactics to force families onto reservations. Before Celia could respond, the sound of approaching horses shattered the morning quiet. Multiple riders moving with measured cadence of official business. Nayati was at the window instantly, his posture shifting into heightened alertness. Dr. Finch. She's early this month. The rider who approached was a woman in her 40s, wearing practical wool clothing and riding astride with confidence. Her saddlebags bulged with medical supplies, and her weathered hands showed the yellow stains of habitual pipe smoking. Dr. Ada Finch had been serving scattered settlements for over a decade, treating everything from births to gunshot wounds with equal professional competence. More importantly, she had earned trust from both white settlers and Lakota families rare in territory, where suspicion often meant the difference between life and death. "Nayati," Dr. Finch called out, her voice carrying gravelly authority. "Heard the blizzard hit hard. Thought someone might need tending." "Doc." Nayati opened the door. "Someone I'd like you to meet." Dr. Finch's sharp eyes took in Celia's condition, with practiced assessment, torn clothing, frost-blackened fingers, unmistakable signs of someone who had barely survived exposure. But there was something else in her gaze, deeper interest, that made Celia wary. "And who might this be?" "My wife," Nayati said smoothly. "Celia." The doctor's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she made no comment about the sudden appearance of a spouse. Instead, she focused on Celia's feet with professional concern. "Those boots are destroyed, and I'm guessing your toes aren't much better. Mind if I take a look?" For the next hour, Dr. Finch worked with brisk efficiency, treating frostbite while maintaining conversation about weather, local news, and growing tensions between Army patrols and reservation families. "Heard Pike's been expanding his operations lately," Dr. Finch mentioned casually while bandaging Celia's toes. "Asking pointed questions about missing supplies, strangers in the territory. Word is, he's received authorization for wider search powers." The warning was unmistakable. Pike was escalating systematically, using official channels to legitimize private vendetta. Time was running short for anyone hoping to remain hidden. "I lost someone close to Pike's operations once," Dr. Finch continued, her voice carefully neutral despite obvious emotional weight. "Young man, barely 21. Got mixed up in things he didn't understand, trying to expose corruption he'd discovered." She paused, hands stilling on the bandages. "Sometimes personal loss gives a person particular insight into certain types of evil." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Finch wasn't simply a neutral medical professional making routine calls. She possessed personal reasons for opposing Pike. Reasons that might make her either valuable ally or dangerous liability. Territory's always been harsh on folks who don't understand local customs. Dr. Finch concluded, her meaning clear. "Especially women traveling alone. Good thing you found yourself a husband, Mrs." She paused, realizing she didn't know Celia's married name. "Bergstrom?" Celia said automatically, then caught herself. I was. Now I suppose I'm Mrs. Nayati, though choosing a Christian name might make paperwork simpler." Practical thinking. Dr. Finch gathered her supplies. "Word of advice, Cinderbluff has developed a vicious appetite for women who walk alone. You seem smarter than most, but this territory tests everyone's limits." As the doctor prepared to leave, she conducted a quiet trade laudanum for one of Nayati's horses. But as she mounted, she caught Celia's eye, with a look suggesting their conversation was far from finished. "If you ever need to discuss medical history, I keep regular hours." After her departure, Celia and Nayati began establishing their routine. He showed her the forge in the lean-to, basic but functional, equipped with essential tools for metalwork. She demonstrated her skills by adjusting the rear sight on his Winchester, her fingers necessarily brushing his cheek as she made final calibrations. The contact was brief and practical, but it carried electrical charge that surprised them both. Nayati stiffened at the intimate touch, then forced himself to remain still as she completed the work. "There," she said, stepping back. "The offset should compensate for parallax issues with your damaged eye." Nayati tested the sight, impressed by the improvement. "You do exceptional work." Johann was a patient teacher. Celia wiped her hands, suddenly aware of how domestic the scene had become. "What about you, who taught you to move so quietly?" "My grandfather." and necessity born of survival. His fingers traced scarred tissue around his damaged eye. After the fire, I had to learn entirely new ways of seeing the world. The afternoon brought visitors, each adding threads to the complex web sustaining life along the river breaks. Rowan Tate arrived, thin-shouldered man who served as both schoolteacher and justice of the peace, bringing books for Lakota children and trading newspapers for pemmican. His conversation revealed another layer of complexity. "Had an interesting visitor last week," he mentioned while conducting their exchange. "Gentleman from back east asking about land ownership records. Seemed particularly interested in properties that had changed hands due to unfortunate circumstances. Someone was investigating the pattern of convenient deaths and property transfers characterizing Pike's operations. Whether this represented opportunity or additional danger remained to be determined. The Odell family came next, their wagon loaded with vegetables to trade for a rifle spring Nayati had promised to repair. 5 children under 12 clustered around their parents' faces, showing the hollow-cheeked look of people who knew hunger intimately. Mrs. Odell's eyes lingered on Celia with curiosity, but frontier politeness prevented direct questions. As visitors departed, Celia began understanding the delicate ecosystem Nayati had constructed. He wasn't merely a lone warrior hiding from authority, he was a crucial node in an extensive network, connecting scattered Lakota families, sympathetic whites, and anyone existing in dangerous spaces between official law and frontier reality. That evening, as they prepared their simple meal, an unexpected moment arose. The sun had broken through clouds for the first time since the blizzard, casting golden rays across endless grassland. Nayati knelt in the yard, testing his adjusted rifle sight, while Celia leaned against the corral fence, watching him work with growing appreciation. Her dress remained torn and stained hair hanging loose around her shoulders in a manner that would have scandalized polite society. Exhaustion had carved new lines around her eyes, but there was something resilient in her bearing strength that hardship had revealed rather than broken. Nayati glanced up from his weapon, and their gazes met across the sunlit yard. The moment stretched longer than either intended, charged with awareness that went beyond their practical arrangement, recognition of complementary strengths, the slow burn of genuine compatibility. The spell was broken by his hoarse nickering, but the connection had been established. Their first day as husband and wife, in name, if not yet in fact, was drawing to a close, and both understood that something fundamental had shifted between them. That night, as they settled into separate sleeping arrangements, Celia found herself listening to quiet sounds of Nayati moving through evening routines. The careful way he secured doors and windows, soft sounds of him cleaning weapons, whispered words in Lakota that might have been prayers or thoughts spoken aloud. For the first time since Johan's death, she felt something approaching safety. Not mere illusion of security that walls might provide, but deeper comfort from being in the presence of someone genuinely competent and trustworthy. Someone who understood the value of partnership in a world designed to isolate and destroy the vulnerable. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, new tests of their fragile alliance. Pike would not forget about missing rifle parts, and their enemies would not remain passive while evidence of their crime stayed hidden. But tonight, sheltered by honest walls and protected by someone who had chosen to trust her despite obvious risks, Celia allowed herself to hope that survival might be possible even for the guilty and hunted. The morning of their 6th day together dawned crisp and clear with crystalline air that made distant objects appear deceptively close. Celia was at the forge, carefully adjusting a trigger mechanism with Johan's precision tools, when the sound of a single horse approaching made both of them pause. The rider who appeared was clearly related to Nayati. They shared the same strong jawline and high cheekbones, though the newcomer's face bore no scars. Perhaps 25 years old, He wore an interesting mixture of traditional Lakota clothing and military-issued items that immediately marked him as someone navigating between two distinctly different worlds. But as Chaska dismounted with fluid grace, Celia noticed details that seemed inconsistent with a scout's typical circumstances. His horse was exceptionally well-fed and groomed far better than most Army scouts could afford. The beadwork on his moccasins showed expensive craftsmanship, and his rifle was a custom-modified Winchester that would have cost several months' military pay. "Brother," the young man said in English, touched with Lakota rhythms, "we should talk about matters that concern both our futures." "Celia, this is Chaska, my half-brother," Nayati said with careful formality. "He scouts for the Army." The words carried implications that made Celia's skin crawl. In the brutal politics of the reservation system, Lakota who worked for the military occupied precarious middle ground, suspect to both sides, fully trusted by neither. "I came to warn you about Pike." Chaska said, his dark eyes finding Celia's face with obvious curiosity. "He's been asking pointed questions about missing rifle parts throughout his chain of command. He knows they came through this area." "How does he know that—" The dangerous edge in Nayati's voice could have cut glass. "Because reliable information reaches him through various channels." Chaska replied, his answer curiously evasive. "But I also managed to convince him they were moved south toward the railroad several days ago. Bought you some time, but probably not much." The simultaneous warning and misdirection created moral complexity that made Celia's head spin. But something in Chaska's manner, a slight hesitation before speaking eyes that didn't quite meet his brother's directly suggested layers of deception, she couldn't penetrate. "Why help us?" Nayati asked. "Because my wife needs medicine, and our children need food, and the Army pays considerably better than pride." Chaska replied without apparent shame. "But also because I remember who pulled me out of that burning lodge when we were boys. Some debts run deeper than politics." As the brothers talked, Celia found herself studying Chaska more carefully. His responses felt rehearsed, as if he had prepared for this conversation in advance. His explanations were logical, but they came too smoothly, without the hesitation and uncertainty that usually marked genuine emotional conflict. "The parts," Chaska said finally. "Where are they actually hidden now?" Nayati studied his brother's face for a long moment, weighing trust against necessity. After visible internal struggle, he retrieved the satchel and revealed the hidden compartment containing the modified rifle components. "Celia's been finishing Johan's work. 6 complete rifles ready for market with components for several more." Chaska examined the weapons with expert eyes, his expression growing troubled as he recognized the superior quality. "These aren't simply modified Army weapons. This represents precision engineering that requires years of specialized training. Someone's been running a sophisticated manufacturing operation." "Johan was part of it," Celia said quietly. "But he tried to withdraw when he realized how deep the conspiracy reached. That's when Pike had him murdered. There's something else you need to understand." Chaska said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Pike hasn't just been eliminating individual threats. He's been systematically destroying anyone who could testify about his operations. The gunsmith in Deadwood last month, that traitor who died in the river, the scout who supposedly drank himself to death. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Pike had been conducting a slow-motion massacre, cleaning up loose ends with methodical precision. But as Chaska detailed each death, Celia noticed something that made her blood run cold. The way he described specific details, the intimate knowledge he displayed. It was almost as if he had been present for some of these conversations. Unless he's not just gathering information for survival, she realized with growing horror. Unless he's been reporting back to Pike all along. How many others do you think he's killed? Nayati asked. Dozens, possibly more. Pike keeps detailed records, but they're coded and carefully hidden. Chaska replied. The only way to stop him permanently is to get concrete evidence to someone with authority and integrity to act decisively. Before anyone could respond, the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the valley from the direction of the Odell farm. Not single shots of hunting rifles, but sustained volleys that meant serious trouble. Raid, Chaska said grimly. Pike's moving faster than I anticipated. As they watched smoke rise from their neighbor's homestead, Celia couldn't shake growing suspicion that Chaska's presence here at this exact moment was too convenient for coincidence. But there was no time for doubts. The war was escalating, and their survival depended on reaching the Odell family before Pike's men could use them as examples to terrorize other potential allies. The ride to the burning homestead took them across broken country where spring runoff had carved temporary creeks through hardened ground. Smoke rose in dirty columns from what had been a modest but prosperous farm, and the acrid smell of burned wood carried on the wind like incense from a funeral pyre. They found the family huddled in their root cellar, emerging like frightened animals, when Nayati called out in gentle tones. Mrs. Odell clutched her youngest child, while Tommy, the 10-year-old boy, stood protectively in front of his younger siblings with heartbreaking determination. 4 men, maybe 5. Tommy reported with precise observation, born of necessity. All masked, but one had a voice like broken glass. They took our milk cow and shot holes in the water barrel just for meanness. Walt Krieg's voice was indeed distinctive gravelly from years of tobacco and whiskey, unmistakable to anyone who had heard it. Pike's foreman was escalating pressure systematically using terror tactics to isolate potential allies. But as they helped the family gather possessions, Celia noticed Chaska hanging back slightly, his attention seeming to focus more on surrounding terrain than the immediate crisis. When she caught his eye, he looked away quickly, almost guiltily. They said next time it'd be the house with all of us inside, Mrs. Odell whispered. Said folks who harbored thieves would learn what hospitality costs. Pike was tightening his noose, systematically turning neighbors against each other by making support for his enemies too dangerous to risk. Pack only what you can carry, Nayati said firmly. You can't remain here. As they prepared to escort the family to safety, Chaska approached Nayati with urgent concern. Brother, I just remembered I'm supposed to report back to my unit by sunset, or they'll send search parties. I should leave now to avoid drawing attention to your location. It was reasonable, but something about his eagerness to depart struck Celia as suspicious. Why hadn't he mentioned this constraint earlier, and why did he seem more relieved than regretful about leaving them at such a dangerous moment? Go, Nayati said, though disappointment flickered in his expression. After Chaska departed with unnecessary haste, they continued their journey to the river breaks. But during the entire trip, Celia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being observed, that someone was tracking their movements with hostile intent. The sensation intensified when they reached the hidden canyon where they left the Odell family with trusted friends. As they prepared to return home, she noticed fresh horse tracks in muddy ground near the canyon entrance tracks that hadn't been there when they arrived. Someone's been watching us, she told Nayati quietly. His expression grew grim as he examined the evidence. Same horseshoe pattern I've seen around Pike's men. We're being hunted systematically. The return journey took them through increasingly desolate country as shadows lengthened. But instead of heading directly home, Nayati led them on a circuitous route designed to confuse potential pursuit. It was during this detour that they encountered Dr. Finch riding hard from town with obvious urgency written across her weathered features. Thank goodness I found you," she called out as she reined in her lathered horse. "Pike's mobilizing a major force, more than 20 men, possibly 30. He's not planning arrests this time. He's planning elimination." "How do you know this?" "Because I've been watching and listening very carefully for 15 years. Dr. Finch replied grimly. "Pike's got informants throughout the territory, but so do those of us who oppose him. Word is, he's received intelligence about your exact location and plans to strike tonight." The revelation hit Celia like a physical blow. If Pike knew their exact location, it could only mean one thing: someone had betrayed them. Someone who knew where they lived and had access to their plans. Someone like Chaska. "There's something else," Dr. Finch continued. "I've been checking on your brother-in-law's finances. Army scouts don't typically own prime horses, expensive weapons, and jewelry worth more than most settlers see in a lifetime." The pieces began falling into place with terrible clarity. Chaska's expensive possessions, his convenient warnings that always bought just enough time to keep them alive, but never enough to truly escape his inside knowledge of Pike's operations, his eagerness to know the exact location of the hidden rifle parts. "He's been playing both sides," Nayati said quietly, the words emerging like a physical wound. "More than that," Dr. Finch said grimly. "I think he's been Pike's primary source of intelligence about Lakota movements throughout the territory. The raids blamed on random raiders, the convenient accidents that have befallen Pike's enemies, Chaska's been providing the information that made them possible. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Nayati had trusted his brother completely, had been willing to risk everything based on family loyalty that apparently meant nothing to Chaska. But there was no time for grief. Pike's force was approaching, and they needed to reach defensive positions before they were caught in open ground, where superior numbers would make resistance impossible. "The old mine workings," Dr. Finch suggested. "It's the only place where we might have tactical advantage against overwhelming odds." As they rode hard toward the abandoned silver mine, Celia found herself thinking about family bonds that had just been revealed as elaborate deception. If Chaska could betray his own brother for money and advancement, what did that say about the nature of loyalty and trust? Perhaps the only person you can truly trust, she realized, is the one who chooses to stand with you when they have nothing to gain from it. And as bullets began whistling around them from Pike's advance riders, she understood that such trust was about to be tested in the most decisive way possible. The abandoned silver mine, carved into the hillside like a wound that had never healed, its entrance partially concealed by scrub oak and fallen timber. Dr. Finch led them through gathering blackness with confident familiarity, her medical bag slung across her shoulder like a soldier's kit. "These workings extend deep into the mountain," she explained as they descended into darkness that swallowed their lantern light. "Multiple levels, branching tunnels, plenty of places to make a defensive stand." Behind them, pursuit grew louder as Pike's forces reached the hillside and began their search. But the acoustics created disorienting echoes that would make it difficult for attackers to judge distances accurately. "How well does Pike know this place?" Nayati asked, positioning himself at a junction where 3 tunnels converged. "Oh, well enough. He's used these mines before to hide stolen goods and conduct business away from public scrutiny," she replied grimly. "But we know them better, and desperation makes excellent motivation." They barely reached their defensive position when muzzle flashes lit up the tunnels behind them. Pike's men were advancing with military precision, using covering fire to leapfrog through narrow passages. But as the battle was joined, Celia heard something that made her blood freeze: Chaska's voice, calling out instructions to Pike's men about tunnel layout and defensive positions. "They're holed up at the main junction," he was saying. "3 tunnels converge there, but if you can get men into the lower level, you can come up behind them through the old air shaft." The betrayal was complete. Not only had Chaska led Pike to their location, but he was now actively helping coordinate the attack that would end their lives. Nayati's face went ashen as he heard his brother's voice echoing through the chambers. "Chaska!" He called out, his voice breaking with anguish. "Why?" "Because I chose the winning side, brother," came the reply from the darkness. "Pike offered me land position, a future for my family that doesn't involve hiding in caves. You chose to fight a war you couldn't win. I chose to profit from inevitable victory." The casual dismissal of family loyalty hit Nayati like a physical blow. For a moment, his rifle wavered as the full scope of betrayal sank in. His own brother, the person he had loved and protected since childhood, had been systematically destroying everything he cared about for personal gain. No, Celia thought, with crystalline clarity. Not like this. Not when we've come so far. She stepped forward, her voice carrying across the cavern with steel-hard determination. "The only one dying here tonight is you, Pike, and your treacherous accomplice can join you in hell." Her words galvanized Nayati back into action. The grief didn't disappear, but it transformed into cold fury that made him extraordinarily dangerous. When Pike's men resumed their advance, they found themselves facing defenders who fought with desperate precision, born of having nothing left to lose. Pike's voice cut through the darkness with triumphant malice. "Touching family reunion, but playtime's over. Surrender now, and I might make your deaths quick." Instead of surrender, Dr. Finch's rifle spoke with deadly accuracy. Her medical training extended to precise knowledge of human anatomy that made her shots devastatingly effective. But it was Celia who turned the tide through ingenuity rather than firepower. Using her clockmaker's understanding of mechanical systems, she had noticed that one of the main support timbers was under tremendous stress from geological settling. There, she thought, sighting carefully on the exact stress point where wood grain showed hairline fractures. Her shot struck with clockmaker's precision. The timber splintered with sounds like breaking bones, and immediately the tunnel began to groan with shifting weight. Rock cascaded down. Men screamed. The avalanche sealed off Pike's main avenue of attack, trapping several of his men in the collapse, while forcing the survivors to find alternate routes through unfamiliar passages. "The lower tunnels," she called out. "If we can reach the underground river, we can escape through the natural cave system." They fought their way deeper into the mine, the sound of falling rock and screaming men echoing behind them. Pike's voice, raised in fury rather than triumph, now promised terrible retribution for anyone who survived. But Chaska's voice was notably absent from the chaos. In the confusion of battle and structural collapse, Nayati's traitorous brother had apparently decided that discretion was preferable to valor when the tactical situation shifted against his chosen allies. The underground river ran swift and cold through chambers carved by centuries of patient erosion. The sound of rushing water masked their movements while providing an escape route that even Pike's superior numbers couldn't easily follow. "Where does this lead?" Celia asked as they waded into the dark current. "Bitter Creek, about 2 miles downstream," Dr. Finch replied. "There's a cave opening where we can reach the surface, assuming we don't drown or freeze first." The journey through the underground waterway was harrowing. The current was stronger than expected, the water shockingly cold, and the darkness absolute except for their failing lantern. But they emerged near dawn, exhausted but alive, to find Pike's surviving men searching the hills above the mine entrance. Pike himself stood silhouetted against the sunrise, his rage visible even at distance, as he realized his prey had escaped through channels he couldn't follow. "What now?" Nayati asked quietly, staring back toward the mine where his brother's treachery had been finally revealed. "Now we finish this properly," Dr. Finch replied with grim determination. "Pike's records are still hidden at his headquarters. If we can get them to honest authorities, we can destroy his entire operation permanently. Even if it costs us our lives. Especially then, Celia said firmly. Some things are worth dying for. Justice for Johann, for your mother, for all the others Pike has murdered that's worth any price. As they made their way toward what would certainly be their final confrontation, none of them spoke about the personal cost of Chaska's betrayal. But all understood that some wounds cut too deep for healing, and some betrayals destroyed more than tactical advantage. The war was entering its final phase, and only complete victory, or total defeat, remained as possible outcomes. But Pike wasn't finished with them yet. His fury at being outmaneuvered in the mine had transformed into methodical rage. Within hours of their escape, his men were everywhere, blocking roads, watching river crossings, setting up checkpoints at every settlement. He's gone mad with it, Dr. Finch observed, as they crouched in a grove of cottonwoods, watching a patrol pass dangerously close to their hiding spot. This isn't military tactics anymore. It's personal vendetta consuming everything else. The hunters had become the hunted in earnest. For 3 days they moved like ghosts across the territory, sleeping in ravines, drinking from muddy streams, always one step ahead of the net. Pike was drawing tighter around them. On the second day, they nearly walked into an ambush at Willow Creek. Only Nayati's enhanced hearing saved them. The distinctive click of a rifle being cocked reached his ears just before the trap was sprung. "Down," he hissed. They dropped flat as bullets whined overhead. Return fire came from multiple positions. Pike had learned from the mine disaster and was taking no chances with superior numbers this time. "Move," Celia shouted. They belly-crawled through tall grass while lead clipped the earth around them. Dr. Finch grunted as a bullet creased her shoulder, but kept moving with grim determination. Behind them, horses thundered as mounted pursuit gave chase. The race became a deadly game of hide-and-seek across broken country where every depression might offer salvation or prove to be a death trap. They reached a dry wash just as their pursuers crested the ridge behind them. Dust clouds marked the approach of at least a dozen riders, all armed and eager for the bounty Pike had placed on their heads. Nayati pointed to where the wash curved around a rocky outcrop. "If we can reach those boulders." A bullet struck stone inches from his head, spraying granite chips across his face. Blood trickled from a dozen tiny cuts, but his aim remained steady as he returned fire. Celia found herself pressed against sun-heated rock, her revolver growing hot in her grip as she fired at targets that appeared and vanished like deadly mirages. The acrid smell of gunpowder, mixed with dust and fear sweat, created an atmosphere of concentrated violence. "Got one," Dr. Finch called out as a rider tumbled from his saddle. But more kept coming. Pike had turned their pursuit into a crusade, offering rewards that had brought every bounty hunter and desperate man in the territory to join the hunt. They broke contact only when a sudden thunderstorm rolled across the grassland, turning visibility to mere yards and giving them the cover they needed to slip away into the network of ravines that cut through the territory like scars. But the constant pressure was taking its toll. Dr. Finch's shoulder wound was worse than she admitted. Nayati was favoring his left leg, where a ricocheting bullet had grazed the bone, and Celia felt the weight of exhaustion settling into her very bones. "We can't keep this up much longer," she thought grimly. "Pike knows it too. He's wearing us down deliberately, waiting for us to make the mistake that'll finish us." On the third night, huddled in an abandoned homestead that had been burned out the previous winter, they made their decision. "Tomorrow," Dr. Finch said simply. "We end this tomorrow, one way or another." The old trading post was their target. Pike's headquarters, where his incriminating records were kept. It was also almost certainly a trap, but they were beyond caring about such niceties. "He'll be expecting us," Nayati pointed out. "Good," Celia replied, checking her weapons with mechanical precision. I'm tired of running. The storm of their final confrontation was about to break, and none of them harbored any illusions about the odds of surviving it. The old trading post outside Cinder Bluff crouched against the horizon like a predatory animal, its weathered walls and broken windows suggesting abandonment, while subtle signs revealed ongoing occupation. Smoke curled from a hidden chimney, and fresh horse tracks indicated recent activity, despite the building's deliberately derelict appearance. Pike's headquarters, Dr. Finch confirmed as they studied the structure from concealment among riverside cottonwoods. He's been using it for years to store stolen goods and conduct meetings with his network of corrupted officials. How many men? Nayati asked, his tactical training evident in how he assessed defensive positions. Usually 6 to 8, but he's called in reinforcements since last night's debacle at the mine. She replied grimly. Could be twice that number now, all of them loyal to Pike personally, rather than any official authority. The odds were daunting, but the potential reward was enormous. Pike's personal records hidden somewhere in that building contained evidence that could destroy his entire network and bring justice to the territory at last. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Finch said reluctantly. I've been watching this place for weeks, and Chaska has been here regularly. Not just reporting, but participating in planning sessions that suggest his betrayal goes much deeper than simple information trading. The revelation that Nayati's brother had been actively participating in Pike's criminal conspiracy, rather than merely serving as an unwilling informant, added another layer of pain to an already devastating betrayal. He's been playing us from the beginning, Nayati said quietly, his voice carrying the hollow sound of someone whose fundamental beliefs about family had been shattered beyond repair. Probably, Dr. Finch agreed. But that also means he's underestimated your capabilities. Arrogance makes people careless, and careless people make fatal mistakes. As they finalized their desperate plan to infiltrate the trading post and recover Pike's incriminating records, none of them dwelt on the obvious truth that they were probably planning their own deaths. The odds against success were overwhelming, but surrender would guarantee the systematic destruction of everyone they cared about throughout the territory. In the gathering dusk, as they prepared for what would certainly be their final battle, Celia and Nayati found themselves alone for a moment, while Dr. Finch conducted last-minute reconnaissance. No words passed between them. Words would have been inadequate for what they needed to communicate. Instead, Celia simply reached out and took Nayati's scarred hand in both of hers. He looked down at their joined hands, then up into her eyes. In that look was everything they had built together, trust earned through shared danger. Love forged in the crucible of survival partnership that had grown from desperate necessity into something deeper than either had thought possible. She squeezed his hand once firmly, then released it. They both understood. Whatever happened in the next hour, they would face it together. No words of love or fear or regret were needed. The connection between them had transcended such necessities. Ready? Her eyes said. Ready, his replied. The attack began at sunset, when changing light would make accurate shooting more difficult for defenders while providing cover for attackers approaching from multiple directions. Dr. Finch created a diversion at the main entrance, while Celia and Nayati approached from the rear using their combined skills to overcome the guards with minimal noise. The back entrance was secured by a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron strapping. But Celia had noticed that the hinges were old and corroded, a weakness that could be exploited by someone who understood the mechanical properties of metal fatigue. Using her lockpick tools with surgical precision, she worked at the hinge pins while Nayati kept watch. The metal was brittle with rust and came apart with surprising ease, allowing them to lift the entire door out of its frame without making a sound. Inside the building was a maze of storage rooms and narrow corridors. But Pike's office was easy to locate. It was the only room with lamplight showing under the door, and the sound of voices engaged in urgent conversation. They crept closer, using shadows, and their knowledge of how to move without sound. Through a crack in the door, they could see Pike himself seated behind a massive desk, while Chaska stood beside him like a loyal dog awaiting his master's command. "Should have killed them in the mine when we had the chance," Pike was saying. "Now they're out there somewhere planning another attack, and every hour they remain alive makes them more dangerous." "They can't run forever," Chaska replied. "The men you've sent out will find them eventually." "Eventually isn't good enough." Pike slammed his fist on the desk, making papers jump. "I want them found tonight. I want them dead and buried before dawn, and I want proof that the job is finished properly this time." Behind the desk, Celia could see a large iron safe, its door standing slightly ajar. Inside were stacks of documents and ledgers, the evidence they needed to destroy Pike's operation permanently. But getting to the safe would require crossing 20 feet of open floor under the direct observation of at least 6 armed men. It was impossible without creating a distraction that would alert the entire building to their presence. That's when Celia remembered the chemical knowledge she'd gained from years of working with gunpowder and metal treatment. Many of the compounds used in metallurgy were also highly volatile under the right conditions. From her satchel, she retrieved several small vials of acids and metal salts that she used for gun bluing and other finishing work. Mixed in the right proportions, they would create a reaction that produced dense, choking smoke, exactly what they needed to level the playing field. She worked quickly but carefully, combining chemicals in a makeshift container fashioned from an empty cartridge case. The mixture began to hiss and bubble almost immediately, releasing vapors that made her eyes water. "Now," she whispered to Nayati. She tossed the improvised, a smoldering bundle of oil-soaked rag with pepper and ash, a frontier field expedient, through the crack in the door. Then they both kicked the door open and burst into the room. Just as dense white smoke began billowing from the chemical reaction. Chaos erupted immediately. Men cursed and stumbled in the sudden blindness, their shots going wild as they tried to hit targets they couldn't see. The smoke was so thick it was like moving through cotton wool, but Celia's knowledge of the room's layout from her observation allowed her to navigate straight to the safe. Her hands found the door handle just as a figure loomed out of the smoke beside her. Chaska, his face twisted with fury and desperation, lunged at her with a knife gleaming in his hand. But Nayati was there, moving with the enhanced spatial awareness his damaged eye had taught him. In the blinding smoke, his other senses gave him the advantage over men who relied primarily on sight. The two brothers collided in the middle of the chaos, grappling for control of the knife, while smoke swirled around them like fog from the depths of hell. "Brother," Chaska gasped as they struggled. "You could still join us. Pike would." "Pike is finished," Nayati replied with cold finality. "And so are you." The knife changed hands once, twice, then found its final destination. Chaska's eyes went wide with shock and pain, then gradually became unfocused as life left them. "I'm sorry," Nayati whispered, though whether he was apologizing to his brother or to their mother's memory, no one would ever know. Meanwhile, Celia had reached the safe and was frantically gathering documents while bullets whined through the smoke around her. Ledgers, correspondence, financial records, everything needed to expose Pike's network of corruption was there for the taking. But Pike himself had recovered from the initial confusion and was methodically working his way toward her position, using the muzzle flashes of his men's weapons to triangulate her location. "You think you're clever?" His voice cut through the chaos with deadly calm. "But you've just walked into your own tomb." Instead of responding with words, Celia responded with her revolver. 2 quick shots aimed not at Pike, but at the lamp that provided the room's only light source. Glass shattered and oil spilled, plunging them all into complete darkness. In the absolute blackness that followed, Nayati's advantage became overwhelming. He moved like a ghost among enemies who were effectively blind his enhanced hearing and spatial sense, allowing him to strike with surgical precision. When Dr. Finch's diversionary attack finally breached the main entrance, she found the back room filled with smoke and the sound of ending gunfire. Pike lay dead among his scattered records, while his surviving men had fled, rather than face continued resistance from opponents who seemed able to fight in conditions that left everyone else helpless. The documents? Pike gasped with his last breath, blood frothing at his lips. You think they'll make any difference? My network reaches higher than you can imagine. Kill me, and 2 others will take my place within a month. Maybe, Celia replied as she gathered the incriminating evidence that would change everything. But they'll know that corruption has consequences in this territory, and that might be enough to make them think twice. As Pike's eyes glazed over in death, the long nightmare finally came to its end. But victory carried a price that would take time to fully comprehend the destruction of illusions about family loyalty. The recognition that evil could wear familiar faces, and the knowledge that justice sometimes required sacrifices that left survivors changed forever. The evidence they had recovered would indeed destroy Pike's network and bring reform to territorial government. But the personal cost of obtaining that evidence had been measured in betrayals that cut deeper than any physical wound. Some victories, they learned, hurt almost as much as defeats. The only consolation was that the pain meant they had fought for something worth preserving, even when preservation required destroying everything they thought they knew about trust and loyalty. The territorial courthouse in Bismarck witnessed trials that became legendary throughout Dakota Territory and beyond. The evidence recovered from Pike's headquarters proved even more damning than anyone had anticipated, revealing corruption that reached into the highest levels of federal authority. The trials were swift and decisive. 12 men hanged for murder and conspiracy, while dozens more received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the systematic theft and violence that had terrorized honest settlers for more than a decade. The territorial governor himself resigned in disgrace when his connections to Pike's network became public knowledge. Celia and Nayati, cleared of all charges and recognized as heroes by the reformed territorial government, received substantial rewards for their role in exposing the corruption. But the money mattered less than the official vindication of their actions and the knowledge that Johann's death had not been in vain. They used their reward to purchase good farmland near the site of their destroyed cabin building, not just a home, but a community center where Dr. Finch established a permanent medical practice. The scattered families who had hidden along the river breaks were able to return to legitimate homesteads protected by honest law enforcement that gradually replaced Pike's reign of terror. The Odell family prospered on a new farm, purchased with compensation from seized criminal assets. Rowan Tate was honored posthumously with a school built in his memory, staffed by teachers who understood that education meant hope for children, regardless of their background. On their wedding day, a real ceremony this time, conducted by an honest minister. Before the entire community they had helped save Celia wore a simple dress of blue wool that matched her eyes, while Nayati appeared in traditional Lakota ceremonial clothing that honored his heritage without apology. Finch, serving as matron of honor, presented them with a special gift, a matched pair of rifles custom modified with the finest craftsmanship Johann had ever achieved. The weapons were practical tools for frontier life, but they were also symbols of the skills and dedication that had made their victory possible. Every marriage needs good tools, she said with characteristic dry humor. These should serve you well in whatever challenges the future might bring. As the celebration continued into the evening with music and dancing that brought together people from across the territory, Celia found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The desperate woman who had stumbled through a blizzard with stolen rifle parts seemed like someone from a distant dream, replaced by a person who had learned to fight for justice and found love in the process. "Any regrets?" Nayati asked as they watched the sun set over grassland that stretched unbroken to every horizon. "Only one," she replied, taking his scarred hand in hers. "I wish Johan could have lived to see Pike's network destroyed and justice finally triumph in this territory." "He did see it," Nayati said quietly. "Through you. Every shot you fired, every risk you took, every moment you chose courage over safety, that was Johan's legacy living on through someone who loved him enough to finish what he started." The words carried truth that went beyond sentiment. Johan's death had not been meaningless tragedy, but the catalyst for a transformation that brought genuine justice to Dakota territory. His sacrifice had meaning precisely because someone had cared enough to ensure that meaning was not lost to Pike's corruption. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Celia and Nayati walked hand in hand toward their new home, built on land where honest work would replace violence, where families could raise children without fear, where justice had finally proven stronger than corruption. The story that had begun with a desperate trade shelter for whatever payment might be demanded had ended with the greatest trade of all, individual safety, sacrificed for community justice, temporary partnership transformed into lasting love, and the bitter knowledge that some victories require prices that can only be paid in full by those brave enough to accept that some things are worth dying for. Their love had been forged in the crucible of shared danger and tempered by the constant necessity of choosing each other over easier paths. It was frontier romance in its truest form, practical, hard-won, and built to last through whatever storms the future might bring to test their resolve. The Dakota Territory remained harsh country that tested everyone who chose to call it home. But it was their country now shaped by their courage and defended by their willingness to stand for what was right when easier paths beckoned toward compromise or surrender. In the end, she had traded herself for shelter and found that the shelter she gained was not just physical protection, but the deeper sanctuary that came from being truly known and completely trusted by someone worthy of that trust. It was a trade that had cost them everything they thought they wanted, but had given them everything they actually needed. And in a land where survival depended on making the right choices when the stakes were highest, that was the only currency that truly mattered.